And then one other little announcement before we go ahead and get started. Some people have been asking where they can get Phyllis's books. So just a reminder that there's a room down the hall that has books and literature and lots of other really interesting things to check out if people are interested. All right, so with no further ado, I'm going to get us started on our afternoon program, which this first session, we're lucky to have two wonderful speakers. I will introduce them both, and it has been reunited. Yeah. We had a lost phone, but it's all sorted now. So we are lucky to have two distinguished speakers. I'm going to introduce them both, and then I'm going to get out of the way so we can hear from them, and then open up for lots of discussion. Our first speaker, Rami Khouri, is an accomplished and prolific journalist, academic, and commentator on Middle East affairs. Currently Distinguished Public Policy Fellow at the American University of Beirut, where he founded and directed the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy. He's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Arab Center in Washington. With Helen Coban, his most recent book is Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters, which came out in 2024. And he has a Substack, which is free, so you can sign up for that. We are also joined by Lindsay Kashgarian. She is the program director of the National Priorities Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. Her work on federal budget priorities highlights how militarization of the federal budget creates a lack of investment in people and the planet, so certainly an issue on a lot of our minds, especially today. Lindsay's work and commentary on the federal budget and military spending has appeared on NPR, the BBC, CNN, The Nation, US News and World Report, and others. At NPP, her work is at the intersection of military and domestic federal spending. Join me in welcoming Lindsay and Rami.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you all for being here. Ramadan Kareem for all who celebrate Ramadan. And thank you to the church, and especially to the main coalition for Palestine for organizing this. This pretty solid outcome is an example, I think, of why this issue matters more and more to people all over the United States and all over the world. And we've heard a lot of good explanations today so far, and I'll just add one more. And I'm really taking off from the title of the conference, which is The Consequence of Palestine. And the theme that I want to develop in the 20 minutes that I have is that among the many unprecedented things that are happening, which Phyllis gave a good overview this morning, I think one of the most important and certainly unprecedented, and it's happening literally day by day, is that the exaggerated lobbying, the sort of overreach of Israel and the Zionist lobby in the last 10, 20 years or so, and culminating in the Gaza genocide, which has been supported by the American political establishment, though not the American people, that has brought the situation to a point where I believe that the impact of the Zionist Israeli lobbying that has been parroted by the political establishment and much of the media has resulted in consequences that are now impacting every American household, every American institution, in a way that never happened before. People before, would support Palestine because it's a just cause, because they thought it was the right thing to do, whatever. Now, I think some of the people that are, some of the sort of ordinary Americans, let's call them, people who are not, intrinsically linked to Palestine or the Middle East, that ordinary Americans who support Palestine, including many of you here, are doing so because they're starting to sense some indignation, and they're really angry that some of their fundamental constitutional rights and civic liberties are being eroded, or in some cases negated, because of the overdone lobbying by the pro-Israel groups. For instance, the impact on the media is one clear example, where many people in the media, in the mainstream media, were told to tone down their writing, don't use the word genocide, don't say that Israel killed or starved 100 people today. Say that 100 people perished in Gaza today without saying how it happened. So there's many examples that have been so well documented by how the mainstream media has kind of camouflaged the role of Israel and the collusion of the American political establishment, and most ordinary Americans don't see these details, but all they see at the end is that a talk at their local public library was canceled. An event like this that was supposed to be at a university was canceled, had to move here. Fortunately, the churches have stepped in most of these cases. It's happened with me 3 times so far. So in the last year, when I was giving talks about the book that I co-authored on why it's important to understand Hamas, not to necessarily support it, but to understand what it represents. And every time the talk was canceled because of pressures and threats, immediately a church stepped in and we had no problem, and more people came. So the fact that ordinary Americans are suffering the consequences of extremist Zionist lobbying and the excesses of the state of Israel through its pressures and diplomacy is really significant. And this is an opening, I think, for partly to answer the question that we had this from Phyllis, which is, what is our role? I think our role is to clarify the links between the quality of life of American citizens, which is guaranteed in the Constitution or in laws, or both, the linkage between the quality of life of ordinary Americans and the degradations of those qualities with what the state of Israel is doing. And of course, when you do that, you're going to be called anti-Semites, which is a proof of the excesses of what the state of Israel and Zionist lobbies are doing. And the reality, I believe, from the actual experiences that I've witnessed, in some cases experienced them myself, is that once the Zionist pro-Israel lobby goes overboard and starts calling decent people anti-Semites, and when decent people like Francesca and like all of you and almost all of us, when we stand up to them and say, look, come, let's sit down, let's discuss this. Tell me, how am I an anti-Semite? Give me some examples. Let's have a public discussion about me and anti-Semitism. And of course, they close the phone and they go home. They don't want to do it. And then when you ask them, when they challenge you, when you say something about, the ethnic cleansing of Zionist, pre-state Israeli groups, and you challenge them and you say, look, this is how the state of Israel was created and this is how the Nakba happened, they'll say, oh, that's just Nazi propaganda or communist propaganda. They choose the worst people in the world and associate us with the worst people. It used to be years ago, it was the communists. Whenever the Palestinians did something back in the, say, 60s, 50s and 60s, that we were close to the communists, and then we were close to the Nazis, and then recently we were close to Saddam Hussein, or we're close to Iran, or we're close to ISIS. So one of the Zionist techniques is that they choose the worst, most evil people in the world, in their eyes, and link us with them. And then when you challenge them, say, come, let's have a debate on CNN about this. Or not a debate, let's just have a nice conversation over a cup of coffee. They won't do it because they know they can't defend their position. They know that it's either lies or exaggerations. I've written a column, which is, I'll put it on my Substack. I did it a couple of years ago at the beginning of Gaza. I categorized, I think, 14 categories of Zionist Israeli lobbying and propaganda techniques into different forms. So exaggeration is one, straight out lies is another, changing the subject is another, trying to defame the person you're trying to defame by linking them to Nazis and ISIS is another. So it's a well-studied process now, and this is one of the really new elements which is unprecedented, which is that almost every Israeli action or pro-Israeli Zionist-inspired extreme lobbying action in the West that takes place is now instantly and publicly and often legally challenged by groups like all of us here. That people don't just sit around like in the 40s and 50s, and I remember the late 50s when I was a kid. I was born in 48. When in the late 50s, even in the early 60s, there was no serious pushback from Palestinian or pro-Palestinian groups. They just didn't exist in the West. And that's why the propaganda succeeded so well, and the lobbying with the political elites succeeded so well. But this is all different now. This whole world of knowledge, propaganda, and distorted understandings of what's really going on in the Middle East, that's all completely changed. And it's changed really because of, I think, two reasons. One is the genocide, obviously, the excesses of the Israelis. Before the genocide, there were changes that we could track. And you could track it in public opinion polls, and you could track it in activities and other things. But it was very, very small, very slow change. The big change happened in the last 2.5 years, partly because the genocide was so clear to everybody and so awful. And decent people from any country in the world did not want to see it happen or have their country associated with it. If you were American or British or German or French, you didn't want your country to be linked with this genocide. And that's one of the reasons these protests started, and that's one of the reasons why the pro-Israel groups are trying to shut them down. So there's this dynamic, and the media, of course, was a central process of that, a central vehicle for relaying or implementing the propaganda techniques that Israel pushed out. And they still do it, but they're challenged much more now than they ever were before. And that process also triggered, about 8-10 years ago, a serious expansion in non-mainstream media in the Western world. Alternative media, progressive media, leftist media, justice-based media, whatever you want to call it. People like Electronic Intifada, Mondoweiss, The Intercept, Dropsite, and many other groups like this. And even the mainstream media started, people like The Nation and other publications started publishing more honest, complete stories, articles about the situation. And this started to happen, I think, about probably 8-10 years ago, and again has really picked up speed now. So the media landscape is starting to change, and the reason it's changing is because the Palestine issue is no longer a foreign policy issue. Vietnam happened. I was in college. I remember the Vietnam years. I started college in '66. And once people started being drafted to go to Vietnam, the protest movement picked up really rapidly, partly because of self-interest, but partly because of moral sentiment, that this was an immoral war. So there was that direct link that ultimately caused the U.S. to stop the war, and things changed. In the Palestine case, there was never a link between Palestine and the self-interest or identities of Americans. Now that link is starting to happen. One of our jobs, did you just give me a sign? Oh no, sorry. One of our jobs is to clarify and hasten that linkage, to make it more clear precisely how the excessive lobbying of the State of Israel and the pro-Zionist groups is hurting. And I've made a list, which I don't have time to read, but I'm going to write this up into an article. I have a list of around 30 specific examples. For instance, the British Museum has taken down the Palestine sign on Palestinian exhibitions. Universities are canceling lectures. They've fired some professors. Public libraries are not allowing exhibitions to happen or lectures to happen because they're too sensitive. All of this, of course, after the lobby went after them. You have situations of legal situations where the governments in the US or the UK or other places are trying to use the law to dampen or prohibit nonviolent protest in the name of anti-terrorism or public safety. You've got issues like Human Rights Watch last week didn't publish a report on a report they did about why Israel is wrong not to allow the Palestinians to practice self-determination or the right of return. There was a report, there's a piece of paper with words on it, but the Zionist movement got so scared of that kind of truth coming out into the open by a respectable group like Human Rights Watch that they put pressure on it, and the Human Rights Watch postponed it. And they change it and soften it, but that kind of intimidation is happening all the times. Civil society groups are facing this in countries all over the Western world. In Australia, recently, the government tried to prohibit public demonstrations when the Israeli president went to visit, and there was pushback, and then they were allowed to happen. The IHRA definition of Zionism is being more widely accepted, but also more widely challenged because it is so unfair. It makes it an anti-Semitic crime to criticize policies of the State of Israel, and this has had an impact on some people negatively, where they say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about Israel. It's too sensitive. I'll lose my job or I'll get taken to court." So there's a huge battle going on there in the adoption of, well, what is anti-Semitism, what is legitimate criticism of a state's policies, and what is anti-Semitic. There are moves by many states in the U.S. to make it illegal by law, state law, to implement BDS. So you can't. Some states tried to have somebody was given a contract by the state. They had to sign that they do not boycott Israel or Israeli institutions. And some people pushed back against that, said, no, this is against my right. I have a right to free expression, nonviolent free political expression. And some state, most of those cases were won. Some states accepted the Israeli position but revised it a little bit. So this is an ongoing battle. So this is another important point I want to make. This battle is in its early stages. This is, I think, the new battleground in the conflict between Arabism and Zionism, between the State of Israel and the Palestinians, between the rule of law and the rule of the jungle. This is the new battleground, and it's all over the world. It's in almost every sector of life: civil society, education, media, even religious institutions, any cinema, any sector of life that you look at, you see this. If you look closely enough, you'll see this going on behind the scenes. And what it's doing is eroding the constitutional right of free speech. Free speech is not something that Americans practice because it's part of their, cultural tendencies. It's a constitutionally guaranteed right, and it's explicit. Freedom of speech, freedom of participation, freedom of expression, freedom of political activity, as long as it's nonviolent. This is now being diluted, or in some cases eliminated. There are other dimensions to this when you get the Christian Zionist movement involved, and the Christian Zionist movement is dangerous politically for both for Americans and for Palestinians because it tries to bring in divine righteousness into what is a clearly political, temporal debate about is it right for Israelis to go and set up a settlement in occupied land. And when the American ambassador in Israel starts defending the right of Israel to settle and to take over more lands in Arab countries, this becomes a much more serious issue than just somebody's civil rights. It becomes a new dimension of the expanding universe of the reconfiguration of traditional colonialism, Western colonialism. And this is also what we're witnessing. And the war today in Iran that the US and Israel launched is basically to lay down the law, which has been the law for the US and Israel and some Western states, not all, for probably a century, that anybody who resists or criticizes the state of Israel or the Zionist movement is we're going to shoot them, we're going to shut them up, we're going to lock them up, we're going to throw them out. You know, if they're students at universities now, that's another technique they use. They frighten people here and they threaten them with being expelled if they're immigrants, if they're foreigners, but with a valid student visa. But this new dimension of the conflict that I'm trying to sketch for you includes every dimension of life, and Christian Zionism is one of the most important ones. And so the Zionists and the Israelis have panicked, and they've clearly seen their advantages of a century of success in propaganda and lying and public relations and lobbying. Real success. I mean, if you want to write a textbook on how to succeed, you could take the Israeli Zionist movement and the State of Israel from 1917 till, say, 1920, and you'd say this is how to do it. But they've overdone it, and they've now exposed themselves, and therefore their weaknesses are becoming clear. People are not afraid to push back and challenge them, especially when you're pushing back to assert your rights as an American citizen to your constitutional liberties. So these linkages, I think, are ones that are very important for us to consider. I know there's people working all over the U.S. I've been involved in some groups here and there, trying to figure out what do we do next. What do we do now? The U.S. is at war in Iran. So is that going to set us back? Is that going to get us? So that's part of their diversion techniques. Talk about other issues, not Zionism. And of course, the U.S. is at war in Iran only because of Israel. Iran is not a threat to the U.S. in any direct or indirect way. It is a threat to the colonial, hegemonic, imperial, racist, apartheid-loving, militant, capitalist-based greed of the, and I'm not a Marxist, but this is the truth as I see it. And I'm a Christian from Nazareth, so you know I'm as closely linked to the truth of the church as you can get. And Huri means priest, because our great-grandfather was the priest of the Orthodox Church in Nazareth, which was built over Mary's Well, if any of you have been there. So that's how we got our family name, Huri, because we were the priests in that church, and my great-great-great-grandfather rebuilt it. So I have a kind of indirect link to Jesus and Mary. Therefore, I feel perfectly comfortable criticizing Christian Zionists or excessive Zionists or excessive Israelis. But I've pretty much run out of time. The last point that I wanted to make is the importance, stress what Phyllis mentioned about the poll. The polling evidence is unbelievably important. And the latest poll that came out was just a few days ago, showing remarkably that 41% of Americans now say they sympathize more with the Palestinians than the Israelis, and only 36% sympathize more with the Israelis over the Palestinians. This is unprecedented. It's, you know, all in the whole history of this conflict, it's been like 80% pro-Israel, 5% pro-Palestine, the other people, I don't know. So the changes that are happening, you can see them, and the young people in the West, in the US especially, again, it's not going to impact them much if Zionist pro-Israeli zillionaires buy CNN and TikTok as they're doing now. That's not going to have very much impact at all, because they're not following those. People don't follow those media much anymore. And this is one of the reasons why we're seeing evidence in the polling of this historic shift that's taking place. So the message I want to leave with you, and I'll be writing a lot of this up in more detail in the coming week or so you can get it on my Substack, which is free, is that there's a huge change going on, and it's slow, but it's systematic, and it's moving a little bit more quickly in line with the quickening, hastening desperation of the State of Israel and its Zionist propagandists, as they keep doing excessive things, shutting down lectures and meetings and banning courses and things like that. People are feeling it and fighting back, and that's the spot where activism can emerge with justice and righteousness and to really bring us to the new Jerusalem that we all want. Thank you very much.